Punachi, or the story of a goat. Again here, he defamiliarizes the whole thing. He says, if I use the medium of a goat, it will, reach people better. It was a bestseller, right? You will be moved to tears when you read through it, because it is about, the problem of a woman in the form of an allegorical form of a goat, right? The goat is the seventh one in the family, and what are the problems the goat faces because of being a she-goat in the family all through its life. So defamiliarization helps us relate to the text better. So habitualization destroys art. I remember J. Krishnamurti, one of my favorite writers, thinkers, right? He used to say, right, the violinist, when he plays with the fame in mind, he forgets, right, the beauty of the violin. And towards the end, he says, right, true art is the absence of me. Right? True art is the absence of me. So beautiful, isn't it? Right? That's what exactly, right? The defamiliarization approach, Viktor Shklovsky, and the other famous Russian formalist is Roman Jakobson. We began earlier with the 6 functions of language, isn't it? Right. So Roman Jakobson wrote a work called Recent Russian Poetry in the year 1919, where he prays or pleads or advocates a literary science. He says literature should come up to the level of science. So, it should have the rigor of science. So this is the objective turn that we encounter first in the formalist school. And the formalists, I told you, had a lot of connection with the futurists. I can't explain much on the futurists now because of lack of time. And you can Google on the futurists later after you log out. Now, after the formalists come another important school. The second school that I would like to discuss is the practical critics. We all know them, right? How I. Richards pioneered the practical criticism school. But what was the trigger? Right? I told you, any critical school will have a trigger, like the Russian formalists had a trigger. Spivak had a trigger. Edward Said, when he wrote Orientalism, there was a trigger. Derrida, when he wrote, when he presented his paper, there was a trigger. When you know the trigger, it helps you, or the provocation, you can call it, or the prompt. What prompted them to write? Easily, nobody will take the pen and start writing something unless something has touched not their mind but their heart. This is what we tell our words also. Don't touch research unless a concept has touched your heart. Don't touch your research unless something touches your heart, not your mind, right? Because you should relate to it better. And so, coming to the practical criticism, what was the trigger for the practical critics? I'll just take a detour for about 3 to 4 minutes and tell you what was the real trigger. We all know the 19th century in Victorian England was so chaotic. Victorian modesty, Victorian prudery, Victorian false sense of decency, all these were there on the one side. On the other, you have turbulence, chaos, pandemonium, uprisings, agitations, all these things coming up very often. Right? The peasant revolt was there, the Chartist agitation was there, a whole lot of things were happening in England. And added to that, in November 1859, a great thinker, Charles Darwin, published a very controversial book for the times. Right? It's called, we all know, Of the Origin of Species. And he took a lot of time to publish it, actually, because the Victorians were known for the religious beliefs. So he took a lot of time to publish it. But once it was published, right, people's faith in religion started slowly eroding. They stopped having, they started questioning religion. Because, among the many of the concepts that he has discussed, one essential concept that he says is, human beings are accidental beings on this planet. That means, right, in the religious order, you believe that there is a pious God, a loving God, who created you, who made you of his own image, and that's why you are here. You have a purpose. But he says, no, don't believe that. And, added to that, there is also another, can you hear me? Yeah. Added to that, there is also another, important publication that happened in the year 1883. Nietzsche came up with a shocking philosophical novel. It is called Thus Spake Zarathustra. Another translation would be Thus Spoke Zarathustra. It is about, we all know the story, the philosophical novel. It's about, right, the titular hero, the protagonist, going around looking for a person called God. And he finds that, yes, there was a person called God, but now he no longer exists. Why? Because God is dead. That means God was there, but now God is dead. Now look at this. All our belief systems hinge on an entity called God. But now God is dead, he says. Right from birth till death, a person's life is conditioned by some religiosity. The priest comes in, right, performs, right, the rituals. Till death it happens. Even on a wedding day, you have the priest performing the rituals. Now, if God is not there, what about the morals that your religion has given you? God is no more there. So no morals. He was very critical of Christianity, especially because he said Christianity propagates a slave morality. I'm just quoting Nietzsche here. Christianity propagates a slave morality. Like, the priest is at the center and he says, all of you sit down, everyone sits down. All of you kneel down, all of them kneel down. All of you raise your hands, all of them raise their hands. All of you bow down, all of you bow down. It's a slave morality. So he says, don't ever believe in this morality. And he advocates, a replacement for the person called God. Shocking, for Victorian society. And the person whom he advocates is human beings, whom he calls as, superior beings, Übermensch. We should also remember that Nietzsche heavily influenced Adolf Hitler also, right? So he calls, the Übermensch, superior beings. That means you have the power within you to overcome any obstacle, right? When you believe in this concept, he says. This was another crisis that was staring at England in the 19th century. The third crisis came up from a least expected source, from Sigmund Freud. He gave another term when he came up with this, psychoanalytical research. He came up with, this 1895 book, Studies in Hysteria, which he co-authored with his friend. There, he talks about human beings as sexual beings. Look at that. In Charles Darwin, we became an accident. In Nietzsche, we lost our God. And in Sigmund Freud, our status as a human being has been demoted to what is called a sexual being. At least, Aristotle and Marx have called us social beings, that we are socially conditioned beings, right? We are conditioned by our society in which we live. But here he calls, human beings are basically sexual beings because they are driven by what is called the libidinal instinct. Even art is an expression of the libidinal instinct according to Freud. So in this scenario, please remember, Oxford and Cambridge did not have English literature as in the syllabus this long. Of course, in the year 1828, we have, King's College London having English for the study of language, not for literature. Then 1831, English literature was introduced. Then F.D. Morris became the first professor of English at King's College London. And F.D. Morris, he gave a very beautiful speech, inaugural address for the gathering. You know what he said? literature, we and serve to emancipate the people out of their stupor. Stupor means, right, their lethargy, their immorals, unethical ways of life. There was another famous critic who said, George Gordon, who said, if you don't throw them a few novels, the people, the Philistine crowd, as Matthew Arnold calls them, the Philistine means those who have not read books, the vulgar, low crowd. So he says, if you don't throw them a few books, they will throw stones at you. And there was another critic who said, religion has failed England. Literature should step in and fill the breach. I repeat, religion has failed England because attendance in places of worship was dwindling, and literature should step in and infuse ethics, values, culture to society. And that's why Matthew Arnold, in a study of poetry, he advocates poetry as an alternative to religion. It ennobles, it refines an individual, it shapes an individual. We have the first, a professor of English and an MCCN, William Miller. He was an English professor. He was an ardent lover of Shakespeare. He said, right, read Shakespeare, become cultured. Of course, in theory, I'm going to debunk the whole thing, but I'm just saying this. Read Shakespeare, become cultured. So literature was supposed to give you culture. And it was supposed to ennoble you, make you elegant, refined. And why? Because he found the Victorian society in shambles, in chaos altogether. And at this juncture, right, Oxford in the year 1894, it accommodated, right, the study of English literature for the very first time in 1894. And very soon, Cambridge also followed suit in the year 1911. Right. They accommodated English literature. But there was a professor of history who was opposing the study of English tooth and nail all along. And he gave a lecture in defense of his argument. You know what he said? Well, English literature, we thought it did not have any use value, but you guys say it has a use value. What is the use value? It ennobles people. It makes people better human beings, civilized, whatever you say. It gives values. Okay. He asked a very simple question. How do you guys examine, evaluate, taste? A very shocking question, isn't it? Like, for Cambridge intellectuals of the day, a history professor asked the question, how will you examine taste? In sciences, there is no bias when the teacher evaluates an answer sheet, right? A mathematics professor, when she or he evaluates, it goes by objectivity. We all know some little formulas, a plus b the whole square equals, we all know that. So based on paradigms, they do it. But here, if literature is going to be subjective, how are you going to examine taste? This question set the hearts and the minds of the intellectual professors of the Cambridge School, of Cambridge University, thinking. They were thinking and thinking and thinking. And then, right, three wonderful minds came together under the headship of Richards, professor at Cambridge, Ivor Armstrong Richards, and then his Sishya, William Empson, and F.R. Lewis. They came together, and then you have what is called the practical criticism school. So this was the trigger, right, that helped condition, this practical criticism school.